The sun baked the red soil of Arizona, turning the desert into a sea of shimmering heat. Every breath felt like fire. Near a crumbling fence line, an old rancher named Tom Callahan knelt beside a dying mule, his last remaining animal. The land had turned against him, his cattle gone, his well almost dry, and the war between settlers and the Apache had turned neighbors into enemies. He had buried his wife the previous winter, and his only son had ridden off to fight, leaving him alone with silence and dust. Tom wiped his face with a trembling hand and whispered, "Lord, I don't got much left, but I still got water enough to live another day." He looked toward the well beside his shack, its rope frayed and bucket half broken. He didn't expect visitors, not out here. Yet that morning, fate was already riding his way. From the ridge, shadows appeared, 5 Apache warriors, their faces hard with hunger and exhaustion. Their horses stumbled. One of them was wounded, bleeding from a rifle shot. Tom froze. His heart pounded. He had heard stories. Settlers ambushed, ranches burned. The Apaches were said to be merciless. He could have hidden. He could have reached for his old Winchester rifle. But instead, something inside him refused to move. Maybe it was grief, or faith, or something deeper, a belief that fear only feeds hatred. The riders stopped a few yards away. The leader dismounted, his black hair tied with leather, his eyes sharp as obsidian. They were clearly desperate. The youngest among them clutched his side, blood soaking his tunic. Tom raised his hand slowly, his voice rough. "You're hurt," he said. "There's water here, if you mean no harm." For a moment, no one moved. The desert wind howled between them. Then the Apache leader nodded once. The tension cracked like thunder giving way to rain. Tom fetched his bucket and filled it from his well. He held it out. The men hesitated, watching him with suspicion, but thirst spoke louder than pride. One by one, they drank, their cracked lips touching the cool rim. The wounded boy collapsed, and Tom knelt beside him, tearing his own shirt to wrap the bleeding wound. The leader spoke in broken English. "You help enemies." Tom looked him in the eye. "Ain't no enemies when a man's dying of thirst." The leader's gaze softened for just a moment. He placed a hand over his chest. "You have heart." As the sun dipped low, Tom gave them what food he had left: jerky, cornmeal, a bit of bread. He even led their horses to shade. They stayed through the night, silent and watchful. The old rancher slept lightly, wondering if he'd wake up with a knife at his throat. But when dawn came, the warriors were still there, tending their wounded, speaking softly among themselves. One of them brought Tom a carved bone knife as thanks. The leader looked to him and said, "My name is Nanton." "You good man, we remember." They rode off into the desert, leaving behind only hoofprints and silence. Tom watched until they disappeared. He thought that was the end of it. He was wrong. Weeks later, word spread through the valley that Apache raiders had hit several ranches. People were frightened. Militias rode out. Tom kept to himself, patching fences, praying for rain. But one evening, he saw smoke rising from the south, a ranch in flames. He feared it was the Johnsons, a family with small children. He saddled his old horse and rode through the night, the glow of fire guiding him. When he reached the site, he saw the militia retreating, bodies scattered, the Johnson farmhouse burning. Then, from the trees, he saw movement, Apache warriors circling like ghosts. He froze again, but something was different. The leader rode forward. It was Nanton. His men had come, but not to burn. They were driving away other raiders, the ones who had attacked the settlers. The Apaches under Nanton were protecting them. Tom couldn't believe his eyes. Nanton dismounted and shouted, "No more war here. Not this land." The old man gave water. "Now we give peace." Gunfire stopped. The surviving settlers stared in disbelief. Nanton rode up to Tom, blood on his arm, dust in his hair. "You gave life to my brother," he said. "You gave water when you had little. The desert remembers kindness." Tom could barely speak. "Why help us?" The Apache looked toward the horizon. "Because one man showed us not all white men hate. You gave water when we were dying. Now we stop the dying." That night, the Johnson children were found alive in the barn. Nanton's men had pulled them from the flames. Tom sat beside the fire, his old hands shaking as he passed water to everyone, Apache and settler alike. For the first time in years, no one raised a weapon. The next morning, the Apaches left quietly, but before riding away, Nanton pressed a small pouch into Tom's palm. Inside was a smooth stone painted with the mark of his tribe. "If you ever need help," Nanton said, "show this. My people will know your name." Months passed. Rain finally came to the valley. The well filled again, grass grew green, and Tom's son returned from the war. He listened as his father told the story of the day he gave water to his enemies. The young man struggled to understand, still carrying hate from battles fought. "They killed friends of mine, Pa," he said bitterly. "You should have let them die." Tom looked out at the horizon, where the desert met the sky in gold and red. "Son, hate is a fire. You feed it long enough, it burns you, too. That day, I learned a man's worth ain't in who he fights, but in who he saves." Years later, when Tom passed away, they buried him beneath a cottonwood tree near the old well. His son found that same Apache stone among his father's things, still smooth and shining. On one side, the paint had faded. On the other, carved faintly by hand, were the words, "Water for all." A generation later, when settlers and tribes began to trade and live in uneasy peace, old men told the story of the rancher who gave water to his enemies. Some said the Apaches spared whole towns because of him. Others said Nanton himself rode to Washington years later to speak of peace between nations, carrying a single stone as proof of a promise made in the desert. No one could say for sure what was true. But one truth endured: that compassion, even from the poorest man, could change the course of a war. And so the story of Tom Callahan lived on. Not in books or monuments, but in the memory of those who learned that kindness, even in the heart of conflict, is the only thing strong enough to turn enemies into brothers.